Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching this LTC, and if you're watching this, you probably just bought the Crypt of Blood starter set, and that's cool. I'm excited for you to start your Warcry journey, and as far as sort of what's in the box, it's perfectly good for starting your Warcry journey in terms of you'll get a little bit of terrain there, about enough for half of a board, and then you'll get two half warbands with your vampires versus your stormcast. You'll be able to play a couple cool games, and then after that, maybe once you're done painting those things, you're going to want to expand those things. And that's what this video is going to be about, is helping you on the second step of your Warcry journey. Now, if you haven't started yet and you're considering where you want to start your journey, there is the Crypt of Blood. The Dominion box is also a very solid starter set at the same price point. Now, you won't get any terrain with that, so that would be something that if you already have terrain would be a really good start for you. Or at a slightly lower price point is the Warrior starter set for Age of Sigmar. And cool thing about the Warrior starter set is there's already a couple of content creators in Optimal Game State and War Games on Toast who have made just impassioned videos about sort of getting started in Warcry with that set. So you can always take a look at those two videos. I'll link them down below in the description. But let's say you've played your first game with Crypt of Blood, you had a good time, which I hope you will. I sincerely think you will because Warcry's rule set is just really solid, really sleek, really fun, gets you playing right away. The next thing you're going to want to do, if you want to play Warcry, say outside of this starter box, these start you off with half a warband, so you'll need to kind of expand your two warbands to be able to play at your local game store or at an event at the next convention you head to, something like that. So that's what I'm going to do here. Now, first, before we can do that, we need to kind of take a look at the fighters you're actually going to be using, actually getting. Now, no person on the internet telling you what to do can ever be a replacement for trying them out yourself. I hope that you do try all of them out yourself, but while you're doing that, or kind of to help inform you about maybe things you might miss with each one of them, I'm going to give you a little rundown on each fighter. So, the leader of the Xandire's Truthseekers is Calthea Xandire, and she is an excellent fighter. She is actually a very competitive fighter. She is often used in sort of the highest levels of the tournament game because she has a really incredible ability, and that ability is called Coordinated Strike. You pick a number of visible friendly fighters, so she can't use it on herself, equal to half the value of this ability, rounding up, which is really nice on, say, if you roll triple threes with your initiative roll, you get to pick two fighters within 9 inches of this fighter. And you'll notice on the board, 9 inches feels like a lot. So you really have a wide area of effect with this, and you can pick a lot of friends. Those fighters can each make a bonus move action or a bonus attack action. Some can make a bonus move, others can make a bonus attack. You get a ton of flexibility there, which is really amazing. And what's really wonderful about that ability is that early in the game, this is a movement ability because you get these bonus moves, get into position, get to choose what spots on the battlefield you want to take up based on what the mission is, which is really amazing. But most abilities like that don't then scale into the later part of the game where you are all of a sudden just fighting. And this, if your guys are in combat, guess what? You get to turn this into a sort of attack boost ability. And so the sort of variability there, the flexibility is really, really excellent. Calthea's own profile herself, uh, really nice because she's only 210 points, so there is one other fighter in Warcry that has access to this ability, but it's 240 points for not much more beef there. So Calthea is pretty cheap. She's also a movement 5 Stormcast, which is pretty rare and really nice to have. And she's got these 5 attacks, strength 4, 2s and 4s. So she can really struggle against certain really high toughness fighters, but that's what some of your other friends do well, and Stormcast has a lot of options for taking down high toughness fighters. What she's amazing at is killing cheap things, which is actually something Stormcast kind of struggles with because they don't have a lot of fighters. So anytime you attack a cheap, just 60, 75 point fighter and you don't kill it, it really feels painful with Stormcast because you've only got so many chances to attack, right? Calthea is excellent at doing a ton of damage to those sort of deep, low toughness targets that you wouldn't think so because low toughness should equal harder to kill, but Stormcast actually can struggle sometimes to clear lots of low toughness fighters off of the board. But she doesn't, which is great. Doraz Giantfell is the sort of guy with the big hammer. Just a really generally well-costed combat melee threat. He does really well with attack buffs, which some sort of warbands can give you +1 attack, and that's really good with him. Uh, he can he has an ability that forces the opponent to disengage him. The sort of flavor here is he hits them so hard that they stumble backwards. It can sometimes be really useful. Like Dorcas excels at, especially with his strength 5, he excels at walking up to some of the strongest, scariest fighters in the game and just holding them up for a little while and getting some damage into them. And so sometimes the forced disengage can be really nice there, where he goes up, he slaps them around a little bit, and then he pushes them back. And that can be great for you because, Doraz can go, toe to toe with some of the scariest fighters, biggest fighters in the game, but he won't actually beat them out like during a long, drawn out combat. And so slapping them around a bit and then pushing them backwards for these giant monsters, I'm talking like Doom Bulls, things like that, can be really, really helpful for you. You just have to be aware that sometimes, your opponent does get to choose where they disengage to. And so sometimes they can disengage somewhere where you don't want them to go, because 3 inches can be, just a little bit of wiggle room for them. So you just need to make sure that you use it at times that are going to be helpful to you. And I think that playing it a few times will help you figure that out. Luxus Stormrider is the archer who hangs out with Calthea, and I wouldn't say that she's necessarily a tournament competitive choice, but she is very usable. The chip damage is okay. Getting those 2 shots in can be nice. And then the triple combos really nicely with a lot of different allies, but in this warband, it combos nicely with Doraz. So she has the ability, after she's taken some shots at an opponent, she basically lights them up the way Vigilors do in Age of Sigmar, if you play that game. And then your other fighters will get +1 attack against those things. Now, if the other fighters are, say, Taros, your bird, or Calthea, those are not necessarily the highest impact attacks, but then Doraz, with his high strength and his 3 damage on regular hits, those are pretty high impact attacks. So giving Doraz an extra attack onto something is really, really powerful, and so that can be nice. So it's kind of a nice little synergy piece there. Now, I think her own sort of point for point efficiency is maybe a little bit lacking in terms of the damage output that she gives you, but still really a fun piece and a very usable piece. Peros is their bird, and Taurus is a very special case. Taurus is very expensive for what you're getting, right? You've only got 6 wounds. You're on toughness 2. You don't really do much damage. It's not a 3, strength 2, ones and twos, 2 on a crit, 1 on a regular attack. It's Taurus really cannot fight. But what you do get is those 12 inches of movement and the fly keyword, which lets you essentially ignore terrain for almost all intents and purposes. Um, Taros is very expensive. I'm not sure I would say Taros is at its best with the Truthseekers because they are just so low on numbers that they kind of wish they had maybe 2 cheap things instead of one thing like Taros. But some missions do reward really fast fighters, and so having just one of them in your warband can be okay. I think horde warbands are usually happier to run this because they aren't hurting for those extra points, and so they can usually fit one in. But that's okay. You'll use Taros in a lot of missions and be glad you have it. But man, paying all those points for something that can't fight will sometimes hurt you. Let's take a look at the Crimson Court now. Prince Duval is just a reasonable, mobile fighter, right? When you look at what he does, he's got, 6 damage on his crits, which is kind of wild. Whether or not you like those types of attack profiles is going to be something that you learn as you play. So rolling 4 dice and just praying for sixes to get those 6 damage, that's certainly a sort of experience that some people will love and some people will get frustrated by. Um, he is okay though, on average, as the damage averages out. He can be a sort of support piece when he's using Thrill of the Hunt, or sorry, a giant killer when he's using Thrill of the Hunt. Thrill of the Hunt says if the next attack action made by this fighter, this activation, targets an enemy fighter with damage points allocated to them, so something that's already been hit, add 2 to the attacks and strength characteristics. So these are sort of big, heavy things that can be hit a couple times and you're still not that close to killing them. Uh, Prince Duval can be good with this. 2 more attacks, 2 more strengths. All of a sudden, you're rolling 6 dice, hitting really often, and then with 6 dice, your odds of getting one of those crits are really, really high. And so that can be a really good output. Um, Really looking to do this against sort of really tough fighters, but it can happen a lot with Stormcast, who are your opponents here. Otherwise, all of the Crimson Court have this really cool Call the Crimson Feast ability. Till the end of the battle round, add 1 to the attack's characteristic of melee attack actions made by visible friendly fighters while they're within 6 inches of this fighter. Uh, they can all use it, which makes them all really nice little support pieces in a larger Warcry warband. This ability is harder to make work in the starter set because there's only 4 fighters, right? So this works for all of your nearby fighters, so there's just fewer things that you're really boosting up with this ability in the starter set. But you'll see it's a little bit more useful once you move on to sort of the bigger game in Warcry. Gorath the Enforcer is kind of tough to use. With only 2 attacks, you're only rolling 2 dice every time you swing. It does a ton of damage when you do hit, but man, is that inconsistent. And his strength isn't that high, so your odds of hitting won't always be that high. Now, Gorath scales really well when using Call the Crimson Feast or Thrill of the Hunt, but when not using those abilities, he can be a little bit disappointing. So just be aware of that with Gorath and know that, you're going to often want to use your dice on him, but sometimes your dice would feel better being used by Prince Duval anyway, so it can be tough. But every warband has to have one fighter who's just really hard to use. Uh, Velos von Fane is kind of the opposite of Gorath, which is kind of cool. 4 attacks, low strength, 1 and 5. So again, she's really wishing can roll sixes here. That's sort of a theme of the Crimson Court. But for only 105 points, that's actually a pretty reasonable deal. You can see, 16 wounds is not a lot, but is really comparable to, say, Gorath being 25 points more expensive and only having 2 more wounds. That just reflects really well on Veles von Fane. So that kind of what you get out of her versus how much you're paying is just a really nice little package there. And so I think you'll be really happy with Velas in your games, even though, she'll never be your MVP because she is your cheapest piece. But in terms of what you're getting versus what you pay for, it's really solid. Anais Firstborn, pays a lot of points for that just one more move than the other fighters. I don't know how often that move is really going to be useful for you. It's only one. Now that said, there are a type of mission in Warcry called treasure missions, where it's all about going and grabbing a treasure. And when you're holding a treasure, you get -2 move to a minimum of 3. And so 3-inch move fighters and 4-inch move fighters all go down to 3 when they hold a treasure, but 5-inch move fighters also go down to 3. So there's sort of a line between 5 move and 6 move, where 6-inch move fighters still have move 4 when they're holding a treasure. And so uh, that that sixth point of movement can be kind of a magic number in those types of missions. And so that can be kind of nice for Ananias there. So he definitely has potential. Otherwise, though, you're putting out a little bit less damage than Velas. Like when Velas gets lucky, she just obliterates whatever she's attacking. When Anais gets lucky, it's not quite as devastating, and you're paying more points than Velis for the same thing, and you have one less toughness, so you're a little bit easier to kill there. Can be a little bit tough, but say, compare the Crimson Court's fast thing, Annias, to Xandire's fast thing in Taros. Uh, Annias is a much more useful fighter than Taros is, right? And only 5 points more. So certainly usable, though, very, very fragile and maybe only useful in certain situations. So let's talk about the Truth Seekers and how to expand them, because that's what I think is really exciting about this box, is that both of these warbands expand pretty well into creating other sorts of warbands you can play in the sort of full game of Warcry, and both of them give you lots of options. So if you have Calthea's Truth Seekers and you decide you want to stay Stormcast, you've got two really solid options to go to with them. One is to grab 5 Vindictors. Now, these come in a lot of different value boxes, and so you can get them secondhand for extremely cheap, which is really awesome. And if you have a Vindictor Prime and then just 2 Vindictors, that's a warband. You've got 6 fighters. Calthea, with her ability, is going to make it feel like you have a little bit more than 6 fighters. And those Vindictors can be nice because they move 4 inches and they all have range 2. So they can um, sort of reach in and poke things, which is really great. Also, the range 2 is nice with Luxa because she can only shoot things if they're not engaged, and engagement is within 1 inch. So your Vindictors can sit outside of an inch and still poke things with their spears, and Luxa can shoot those things, which is a nice little bit of synergy there for this list. The other option is to get 3 Annihilators. Those are a little bit more expensive in terms of real dollars than Vindictors, but still not too bad because they are, if you're just using the Shield Annihilators, which I've done here, they are only paying sorry, those are in the Dominion set, so those are going to be a lot less than if you want the kind of multi-option kit that's out there. And what 3 Annihilators gives you that the Vindictors don't, they don't have as much mobility, they don't have nearly as much threat range, but man, are they tough to kill with their toughness 7, which is wild, and they're extremely scary in combat. They do a ton of damage. They're incredibly good at fighting. And Calthea can kind of make it so that their slowness doesn't hurt you quite as much. She can kind of accelerate them across the board. The Annihilator Prime is an absolutely terrifying combat piece. For only 180 points, he goes toe to toe with things that are, 230, 240 in this game. Um, so that can be a really attractive option. So you've got two really solid places to go if you want to play the Truth Seekers in just purely Stormcast. But that said, you don't have to go with Stormcast with the Truth Seekers. The rules for Bladeborn fighters dictate that if you are bringing the leader as an ally, and that's Calthea, you can then bring anyone else in that Bladeborn group just along for the ride, which is really, really great. So let's say you get one box of hammerers and longbeards, and you just go, I love dwarves. I'm going to run these Stormcast with my dwarves. There's all sorts of cities of Sigmar kind of combos because all of them have a Stormcast chamber in the city. There's all sorts of sort of legitimate lore reasons how you can do this. So you can have your Keeper of the Gate, which is a hammerer leader. It's just a nice little efficient um, piece that sort of comes in the hammerer and longbeard box. And then 7 Longbeards for only 490 points. And then you'd have Calthea and Doraz. So this is a sort of combo that just really puts a ton of fighters out onto the board. You've got 10 here. You're going to be able to play all kinds of objectives like that. And then you're going to want to run this with Tempest's Eye. The reason you'll want to run it with Tempest's Eye is that the Keeper of the Gate is a hero who, when they come from the city, Tempest's Eye, they have an ability called Swift as the Wind, where they give everyone within 6 inches of them plus movement compared to half of the dice value. So that'll usually work out to +2 move. And that's really helpful for your really slow move 3 dwarves. And so you'll have your Keeper of the Gate in one deployment group, Calthea in another deployment group, maybe Doraz in another one. Calthea can use her ability to accelerate some dwarves across the field. The Keeper of the Gate can use his ability to accelerate some dwarves off the field. And so even though you have really slow fighters here, you won't feel nearly as slow because you have both of these really awesome movement buffs at your disposal. And then Dorian is just a nice little combat piece so that, not all of your fighters are tiny little dwarves. You will have some actual offensive output. And that is part of why I've chosen this Hammerer Longbeard box too, to expand with Calthea and crew, is that Hammerers and Longbeards both have a little bit more respectable damage output than, say, um, Iron Breakers, which are even cheaper dwarves, but, you know, work for a slightly different playstyle. I think this warband would be very, very powerful. Um, Longbeards are sort of a hot choice right now in competitive play, and so if you're looking to sort of get competitive with your Calthea Xandire at a sort of really, really cheap price, I think this is probably your best route to doing so. You can also go with elves, though. And I think that the sort of Alarith Stone Guard are really, really good. And this kind of goes through the same sort of philosophy as this dwarf list, because the Stone Guard are also slow at move 3. But we're taking these slow fighters because we're getting the most out of Calthea's awesome sort of acceleration ability here. Then the other thing that these True Stone sort of the Seneschal and the four Stone Guard are going to do for you is they've got what those Vindictors had of having that range 2. And so these Stone Guard are going to be able to allow Luxa to still shoot things. She'll be able to give you that +1 attack. And then Stone Guard have very, very solid attack profiles that will really tear things up once you're giving them +1 attack and starting some chip damage with Luxa. So this is kind of a similar idea as far as Calthea zooming some slow fighters up the board, and then you've got your sort of Luxa shooting things, giving extra attacks, and helping out your fighters that way. So kind of a lot of little synergies here, and I think Stone Guard are just kind of underused in general in Warcry. I think they look so cool, and they have a pretty reasonable attack profile, and so I'd love to see people try them out. And this is absolutely something that you can do that's going to be pretty effective with Calthea's Xandire. Now let's get on to the Crimson Court. And the first thing is, if you want to keep them with Soulblight Gravelords, I would suggest getting one box of Graveguard. And that's going to get you, you get two of the Great Weapon in that box, so you can do two Graveguard with Big Weapon. And then you can have six Graveguards with shields, and that's just one shield and one weapon. This gets you to 12 fighters. Graveguard are really weak individually, but point for point, they're incredibly efficient and kind of difficult to kill. They do way more damage than you would expect they do. And then the Seneschal is sort of a more expensive Graveguard that's still pretty reasonable points efficiency for what you're getting. In this situation, I'd really want to keep Anias Curseborn because you kind of need that extra speed. That said, your Graveguard and your Seneschal can get a free move ability as long as they're close by Prince Duval. So you can get them into position pretty well. And so then, the Crimson Court, they combo well with these slow things, not because they accelerate them the way Calthea does, but because they're all pretty quick on their own. Prince Duval moves 5, Velis von Fane moves 5, Anias moves 5 or sorry, move 6. And so that can be really nice for you. And this is a warband that's just going to be flooding the board with fighters, much like that dwarf warband was, and then just taking advantage of the incredibly efficient Graveguard. That said, much like Xandire's Truthseekers, the Crimson Court work pretty well as allies too. And I think one really exciting way to do that is with a box of Royal Beast Flayers. You only have to get one box of them, and there's some fun little bits of synergy here. So the Royal Flaymaster is kind of a cool piece. That's the leader of the Royal Beast Flayers. For 175 points, you get, some speed, 20 wounds, and this 3/4, 3/5 damage profile. Now, if you remember, I talked about sort of um, Gorath, Gorath the Enforcer, having that ability that's really nice when you're calling the Crimson Feast and getting extra attacks. The Slaymaster is a lot like that, but just more consistent on its own than Gorath is. Um, so what you can do here is the Royal Beast Flayers have a fighter in that warband called the Beast Baron who can give multiple free moves. It's sort of like half of Coordinated Strike, where you can give free moves to a certain number based on the dice of fighters around the Beast Baron. That scales nicely when you are using it with kind of high impact fighters like Prince Duval, like Gorath, like Velas von Fane, like the Royal Flaymaster. And so surrounding your Beast Baron with some of those fighters can be really nice. But then you still want to have some numbers to cover objectives and things like that. And that's where Beast Flayers kind of has you covered because they've got those three ghouls that come in that box. And ghouls are only 55 points, so they can run around the board really nicely. And then, of course, you have a really nice warband here for Call the Crimson Feast because you've got plenty of fighters all around, so you have really good chance of calling the Crimson Feast and having it affect multiple fighters, which is nice. And also, you're going to have two different options in terms of Gorath and the Royal Flaymaster for fighters who just really accelerate out of that ability more than the average bear does. So this, I think, is a really solid way to expand your Crimson Court if you don't want to just stick with Soulblight Gravelords. But how about the last thing? And you can't have Warcry without some sweet terrain. The Crypt of Blood terrain, I think it's really good for what it is. Now, the issue here is that it's not a full board. It's really only enough to cover, say, half of a board and really, I'd say a third of a board. But that's where you have a bunch of nice little options for how to expand that. And the first thing I would do is just say Etsy to the rescue. If you type in Frostguard Ruins in Etsy, for example, you get these two really solid pieces that I think have the same vibe as the Games Workshop terrain here, even though these are not Games Workshop. And they are sort of compatible with our 32 millimeter scale models. So if you put these on the same Wolfeye board as you've got these, it won't be the densest terrain set, but it will be absolutely enough to play. I'm a big believer in sort of when I run a tournament, I try to have one third dense terrain, one third light terrain, and one third medium terrain, just to kind of randomize things and favor different war bands. Um, I know a lot of people will say like, well, if it's not a dense terrain board, it's not impressive looking. But I think for the purposes of playing, you need to have all sorts of boards. And these two pieces plus this would make a perfectly solid light terrain board that you could absolutely play on. And what I love about this is that they've got the stairs and the platform here. I think Warcry terrain that you can climb up onto is always really, really fun. So you can kind of look around Etsy for different options here. I chose the Frostguard Ruins because you can find them for a pretty reasonable price. Terrain tends to be more expensive per kind of a box and how you think it would be than models are. And the reason is just it's a lot of plastic. It's silly because, we get excited about our toys, our little figures that are running around the board. But we pay for the plastic and the molding and the things like that. And so terrain tends to be just a little more expensive than you think it will be generally. So that's why the Frostguard Ruins can be a little bit nice there. A all GW option that can be really solid. I would say right now the best one is the Realmscape expansion. And the reason for that, it comes with a Warcry board. Even though it says Age of Sigmar, it has a Warcry board in it. And it has enough terrain to fill it if you're combining with Crypt of Blood. So you've got this sort of two pieces of ruins here that are pretty big building pieces that can take up pretty large footprint on your board. And then you've got these two monuments and this piece of scatter terrain. And so you can push this around the board to make just a really evocative sort of area that I think can work really well for you. So both of these are some pretty reasonable options for a pretty reasonable price. That's everything as far as expanding the Crypt of Blood. And I really hope that if you picked up that set that you're really enjoying your journey into Warcry, and I really hope that I've kind of tempted you to dive in all the way. Let me know in the comments if you've got any other sort of things that came up for you after getting the Crypt of Blood box. I'm really interested to hear from everyone there. So I make tons of Warcry videos. I generally lean towards sort of covering some competitive content and then also creating like silly list building videos, things like that. So I hope some of that interests you, and I'll be obviously coming with more of those in the future. And until then, may all your rolls be crits.